Good day. Thank you for joining me for this talk. My name is Kristen Lowe. I'm going to be talking about my exhibition that's currently on display at Form and Content Gallery in the North Loop of Minneapolis, and the title of the exhibition is Ballad of the Red Fox. This talk will last about 30 minutes, and before I get started, I'd like to thank all the Form and Content members that are photographed here. This year, Form and Content celebrates its 15-year anniversary, and that's pretty spectacular given how fast galleries come and go. I remember the first exhibition when Mayor R.T. Ryback cut that ribbon, so I am very honored to be a part of this historic co-op gallery in Minneapolis. The mission statement, as it says here on the slide, is we aspire to link personal expression to broader social contexts. The location of the gallery is here along with the telephone number and the hours of operation. It says 12 to 5 p.m. here, but it's actually 12 to 6. There's on-street parking and also a ramp across the street. So if you haven't gotten down to see the gallery or any other exhibitions, please come down and take a look. Here's one of my colleagues at the gallery, Ellie Kingsbury, who graciously offered to light the exhibition for me. Thank you, Ellie. Jerry Mathiasen, who's a photographer and has been working in the Twin Cities area for a couple of decades, graciously also came out of semi-retirement to photograph work for me in the exhibition. Thank you, Jerry. It seems like there is always something still left to correct or change. This image here, Ballad of the Red Fox, is about 30 by 45 inches in scale, and it is soft basswood that I've painted and then hand carved. And this particular scene, or part of the scene, is located very close to where I live. I live in Chanhassen, Minnesota, and its proximity is very close to the river. So I worked from this space for a while and then finished this piece in the studio. And what I've done with this work is, after carving it as much on location as possible, I go back into the studio and finish up the work. And I sand down areas in which I then create another scene within a scene of something that I actually have witnessed. I did see a red fox in this, very close to this spot right here where I was working. And often I see deer and a lot of other creatures, and I'm on that trail almost every day, whether I'm working or walking or just investigating the space. So what I'm trying to do here is use charcoal to create that scene within the scene, and also to be sensitive to the wood that is coming through, so you can see some of the movement close to the fox along the lower third of the image is actually the wood grain that I'm following as I develop the image. And for me, the carving of this work is very important because it feels like I'm getting more connected to the energy in the space around me. And working with the wood coming through the charcoal just is like another level of unity and wholeness in the process. I like to work on location whenever I can to emerge from the technology swamp. This is near the Superior National State Park, Temperance River, and that image is one of the diptychs that is in the show where I'm hand carving it and then working on it on location and in my studio. This is the completed diptych that I was doing on location. The title of this piece is Temperance River. If you spent much time in that area, it might not really seem like a depiction of the river, but I'm interested more in the movement and energy running through the space and the kind of history of the place. So on the left panel, it looks like it's a large base of a tree. Part of it is a tree, but part of it is a compression of all of the other natural textures that were around that tree. And what I've done is, again, sand the board, the basswood board, to get as soft as a piece of paper to draw on. And that, I mean, drawing paper is made of wood, but the complicated, more challenging aspect of this was that charcoal doesn't really like to adhere to the wood very much, and so that was a challenge. One of the questions that's come up since this exhibition has been installed is, where did all this color come from? I haven't had a lot of color in my previous work. I think I had preconceived notions of it being pretty tethered to painting, and the content of color has such a surprisingly political history, and colors are so emotive and can be very manipulative, and so I didn't really want it to eclipse the mark making that I have been so interested in. But then I had a unusual experience, and I spent 5 weeks in Italy, and that was an enormous influence on me in regards to color. I was in Italy for 5 weeks total, doing research and a little bit working with students, and traveled to the Amalfi Coast and the small town Agarola and a couple of other small towns near the Amalfi Coast. This is off the Amalfi Coast, and you can see immediately, if you have seen the exhibition, how the blue and terracotta has really influenced my palette. I can't take credit for this picture. It's a professional photograph of the Amalfi Coast, and I couldn't believe that color like this even existed. I mean, I have been to a lot of beautiful locations throughout the United States and in Europe and in Alaska, and I had just never seen these kind of blues and greens and the terracotta and the glow that comes from these colors, the just luminosity of these colors. The prevalence of primary colors in many locations, it was surprising that these colors were not flat. There were also a lot of greens and ochres that might have, they felt a little more connected to the Midwest palette that I'm mostly familiar with, or the palette on the East Coast. Another diptych that is installed in the exhibition is this one, and the title of this work is She Loved English Channel Blue. The 3 central figures in the middle I had found at the Library of Congress. They have a database of historical images from before World War I. And I thought the gentleman in the photograph looked like Picasso, but also the 2 women looked very much like they could have been my relatives. And then the lower left-hand corner has these 4 kids playing on the beach. And in the upper right corner is this solo woman way back, what seems to be way back in the ocean. And I've been asked what the meaning of this piece is for me, but it primarily has to do with just present time, the past memories, and thinking about what is beyond this current time in our life. So I wonder sometimes if that woman in the upper right corner isn't my mother who passed away a few years ago. So this image feels very close to my heart, and a kind of Scandinavian palette of blue, and just the general atmosphere and mood of the piece. One of the challenges while being there was just assimilating and taking in all the visual imagery, which you're bombarded with centuries of development of the visual language. And in being at Pompeii, this is a room from Pompeii, I was struck by a continuous reoccurrence in basilicas in Pompeii, all throughout Italy, of the isolated figure, which became very iconic. You can see the angel in this particular image and all of the negative space surrounding it. This has been something that I've been very interested in for years, is how negative space changes the meaning of an image. This is an image of mine from about 8-9 years ago, and the title of this work is They Loved Each Other Deeply. It's a charcoal drawing that's about 72 inches high and 54 inches wide. And I was interested in the deep black space, the composition is somewhat theatrical when there's that much negative space around it, almost like you're looking at a stage. The subject matter, I had become very interested in the relationship between the keepers and the domestic flock. And in terms of formal considerations, I was struck by how much emotion and intensity increased with an excessive amount of negative space around the image, the subject matter. This work is also from that series, about 72 inches high and about 42 inches wide, charcoal, and the title of this work is "Oh, for the Love of God." Another thing that I found reoccurred throughout the 5 weeks of going to museums and basilicas and churches was how things were revealed within other things. These are 2 tiles from Pompeii, and the way that the image, the scene, the subject matter is framed within like an opening, almost like you're looking through a keyhole or you're looking in through a broken window. One of the most powerful experiences that I had, Pompeii was very visceral, but was the catacombs of Priscilla, which aren't far outside of Rome. And because it was not as much of a tourist space with many, many people, you were in the catacombs of Priscilla with maybe 10, 12 people total. So you are able to look more closely at the iconography throughout the catacombs, along with the energy that you felt in the time and in the space, and what that meant and who was buried there. It was really impactful. This is another part of the wall that I showed earlier in a room in Pompeii. And again, you see the scene reframed on the wall. It wasn't so much the wow factor of it looking three-dimensional and having deep space, but thinking about how time had worn that surface away. And then there's the sort of terracotta color that I've been really struck by. The richness, this one's a little bit redder than some of the other ones that have more of a rosy tone. Along with the color throughout Italy, the other thing that wowed me was the physicality of the space. This particular image is the famous Pathway of the Gods hike that starts in Agarola and goes for about 6-ish miles down the coastline of Positano. Mountains, sheer cliffs, and views that stretch all the way to Capri. It's really, truly unforgettable. What's considered one of the most beautiful walks in the world. Agarola was a town that came about 9th century. It was a part of the Republic of Amalfi in the Middle Ages, and it actually was a very dense, it still is a very dense forest, and the timber that was needed for Amalfi's trading ships came from the Amalfi coast. Although the timber was used to build trading ships around the Amalfi coast, it surprised me to find out that the oldest pictures of ships were found in Scandinavia. These petroglyphs are pretty hard to date, but the Norwegian pictures are thought to be as old as 5,000 to 8,000 years BC. On this path, it is not uncommon to find previous structures. I encountered this one in particular of spiritual practice, structures of spiritual practice from ancient times, such as this one. In one part of this crumbling ruin, I was inside looking through this opening to the outside space. And this notion of interior and exterior and the framing device of that in this image really stayed with me. Another work from the exhibition, this is on softwood, and the title of it is Mother and Child, which is an homage to Rosa Bonheur. And the piece has been hand-carved and sanded, and then the sanded interior kind of space where the mother and the lamb are depicted. This is a detailed image of a lino cut. The lino cut process is a technique where the linoleum is used as a relief surface, and the design is cut into the linoleum surface with a sharp knife or chisel. And this is a detail of that. And I had done some lino cut printmaking and some woodworking, woodcut technique in my past, but I wasn't interested in the printmaking process. I was interested in the sculptural aspect of carving into wood. I didn't want it to then become a two-dimensional image. I wanted it to say a relief image, and I think that came from the looking at all of the surfaces of walls in Italy and looking at the frescoes and looking at the time that was revealed on that surface. Another one of the round format pieces from the show. This particular work is titled Gathering of Five, which comes from some time that I spent on a sheep farm in Nicollet County, Minnesota. I had also been looking at Leonardo da Vinci's deluge drawings early on. I felt that da Vinci's deluge drawing, the series of them, could be seen within our current frame of the climate apocalypse we're currently experiencing. The drawings that he made were in the 16th century and done in black chalk, and Da Vinci returned to this subject matter over and over again. It's thought to be the subject matter of a civilization obliterated. Another round format image from my show. The title of this piece is Solo Laying Home Lamb. This was an image that I did after returning from a trip to Scotland, where there are lots of sheep. The circle is considered to be one of the most perfect shapes, believed to be the symbol of eternity, unity of all things in many spiritual practices. In the Sanskrit, the circle literally means the center, the holy circle in the mandala. The circle, of course, is a diagram used in the performance of sacred rites and is essentially thought to center the mind during meditation. So the circle became I was really interested in this history and spiritual symbolism of the circle. The circle is made manifest here by this Tibetan woman who spins an endless prayer written on a strip of paper that then is later coiled inside the cylinder that she's holding. Here is, of course, a famous image by Leonardo da Vinci, probably the most famous household recognizable image, Vitruvian Man. Carl Jung wrote of the circle symbolizing the process of the cosmos as a whole, and that the square refers to the universe conceived by man. I had done a couple of series studying the migration patterns of eagles and osprey and the nesting habits of eagles and osprey. This is from that series, from the osprey series, and the title of this work is R1 Needs to Get Airborne. Here again, I'm interested in exploring what the drawing mark is capable of doing, and trying to also break away from the formal device of Western art, which is the rectangle. It's kind of the go-to shape. So trying to look more at the compositional energy of the square. This charcoal drawing is also from that series, and the title of this piece is Maya's Return. This image, a charcoal drawing, is from a previous exhibition called The Backstory, titled The Backstory. And I had been studying the nesting habit of eagles and learned that nothing ever leaves the nest, the eagle's nest. So an example of that would be if an eaglet died, it would not be kicked out of the nest. And this struck me as a really powerful symbol of containment and history inside one body. And I started to collect vintage postage stamps from about World War I, and was looking at the iconography of those vintage postage stamps as a country, thinking about like the eagle also representing our national bird, the symbol of our country. Here's a detail of some of those stamps that are running as a horizontal line through the nest of the eagle's nest. You can see one says Emancipation Proclamation with the word free, And also in this strip, you'll find images of Chief Joseph and some other iconography from our postage stamp history. This is another charcoal drawing from that particular suite of drawings, and it's an eagle's nest, but the eagle needs to return. The title of this piece is Nocturne in Black and Gold, just thinking about the nest and the concept of home. And this piece is about 50 by 40 inches in scale, and I've used natural grasses to work in with the charcoal. Back to work in the current show. This particular piece is on soft basswood, and it's 5 by 5 feet in scale, and the title of this work is West Lakeside. And I had been looking at Japanese screens and wanted to do a more direct study of composition, Japanese composition, and I spend a lot of time on the lake canoeing, in again very close to my house, about a mile or two from my house, which is a Lake Anne. And although there aren't koi, koi being in the family of carp, I was interested in bridging together what I had seen at the lake and with this composition study from the Japanese screen. Here's a shot of that lake from the west side. The water is very, very clear, and there are no motorized boats allowed. And it's really one of the last lakes where there is no motorized boats allowed on this lake. And the lake has an abundance of lily pads, and it's quite spectacular to see when they're all in bloom. This is another large piece in the exhibition. 5 by 5 feet, and the title of this work is Facing East. I decided to make one of these teepee structures that I had been seeing erected all over the state of Minnesota and throughout the Twin Cities. One can only imagine why, given the COVID pandemic and after the murder of George Floyd. But there were structures also being built just in my backyard, very close, 100 yards from where I live, by young children. And it strikes one first as like a naive, imaginative play because they mimic the teepee structure. But you start to think about the ceremonial purposes, and they're not for family dwellings in that case. I started to think about the responsible structure and the physical and spiritual needs of human existence as having a protective space. So this was one that was very close to my house, and it would not be uncommon for me to see a deer very next to it or very close to it. And I have seen more than one fox on my walks throughout this space. This is a in-process image of one of those structures that I saw the middle school boys and girls building about 100 yards from where I live, which backs up to a protected nature preserve. I couldn't help but wonder if those middle school kids had any idea the history of this teepee structure and the use of it in the Native American communities throughout the Midwest. I had just recently found out that using carbon dating soil samples that archaeologists had found from what appeared to be an ancient campsite or a village, that there were indications that dwellings were made from a series of wooden poles that existed as far back as 10,000 years BCE. And this is another image not far from one of the lakes in the Twin Cities that struck me. I haven't worked with this image, and I haven't actually worked from this location, but it struck me as similar to the other framework, I would say, of images where you're peering into a space that is a confusing space that sort of mixes time and space into one image. You see the reflection in the water of the trees up above. So there's like a universe into that water, and then the universe and the space into the trees. So this distinction between what is really being seen in what is an illusion, what you don't see and what you do see, just is really the foundation of what I'm thinking about with this work. It continues to astound me, the abundance of creatures that we live with in the Minnesota landscape. This was not in southern Minnesota, but in the Twin Cities, where I encountered this red-tailed hawk that I'm showing here. Somehow this red-tailed hawk, in the memory of this experience, when it sat next to me, right on the edge of the water here, just beyond the border of Lake Harriet, sitting next to me for what was about 15 minutes without leaving. At one point I thought it was injured, and I called the Raptor Center, and then it flew away. But it was an indication of how comfortable this red-tailed hawk appeared to be with human inhabitants. The last image that I'm going to share in this PowerPoint artist talk from the exhibition is Battle at the River Bottom. This piece is also on soft basswood, hand-carved and drawn into. It's about 27 by 45 inches in scale. I worked on it on location near Highway 169, South 169, near the river. And I completed it in my studio. And I've never seen two bucks fighting at the river bottom, but I had been looking at the work of Courbet, and I just could imagine two bucks fighting at the river bottom. The deer that are in the background on the right and left is something that I see weekly when I am on the trails I visit, but I had never seen two bucks fighting. This is one of the Courbet paintings I was looking at. This particular piece is titled Thicket of Roe Deer at the Stream. As I conclude this artist talk, which is for Ballad of the Red Fox at Form and Content Gallery, I'd like to share that the exhibition will be traveling. It will go to the Hillstrom Museum of Art, which is on the Gustavus Adolphus College campus. And that show opens in November and will run through December and close in the early part of January. I'd like to thank you for coming to this talk. It's always nice to share your process and thoughts from an exhibition that may have taken a year to several years to finish. And I appreciate the interest. Thank you for attending. And I hope all will be well.